Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this RTPI Southwest webinar today. The subject today is about design, as you know, and we've got nearly 75 attendees from all over the country joining us today. I'm delighted to be joined by two experts in design, Richard Guise and David Milner. But before I make proper introductions, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping points. And excuse me as I turn my head, but I've got a second screen. So all delegates have been muted, but if you have a question for the organizer or for me or the other speakers, then please put your question into the question box in the GoToWebinar panel, which is the grey panel, which often turns up on the right-hand side. The speaker's presentation will run for approximately 30 minutes before we come to Q&A. So if any questions haven't been answered, then please don't worry about that, because we will ask the panelists to answer those questions and we'll email those out to you. And a copy of the presentation and any other downloads will be sent to you after the session ends. If you lose connection, please try rejoining via the link emailed to you from GoToWebinar. You want to ensure that your Wi-Fi is at optimum level by disconnecting all other devices from the Wi-Fi if you can. If the speakers lose connectivity, and let's hope that's not going to happen today, then please wait in the webinar, keep an eye on your emails in case we need to relaunch, but really that shouldn't hopefully happen, fingers crossed. So I'm just going to very quickly, because we've got a lot to get through in the next hour, and just let me change my document on here to introduce my colleagues today. David Milner is going to speak first of all. David is a projects director and urban designer at Create Streets, which is a national organisation, and they're currently leading and working on a wide range of community engagement, urban design, estate regeneration and local government projects. David's previously from the RAF, which is very exciting, I always think, and also had a spell as an analyst at a multinational retailer. Very interesting. But David has a Master of Engineering from Oxford University and is a member of the Academy of Urbanism. Richard Guise is a local architect and town planner from the Southwest, also a member of the Academy of Urbanism, so that's something that both he and David have in common. Richard is based in Bristol. He's formerly course leader of the MA Urban Design programme at the University of the West of England, and prior to that his career was a fusion of the professional and academic aspects of urban design. Co-author of Characterising Neighbourhoods, Shaping Neighbourhoods, Sustainable Settlements, and 2 volumes of Streets for All. So an amazing record of work. Works mainly for local authorities, producing design guides, which he will touch on later, urban character reports, urban design frameworks. And Richard is a panel member on the Design Southwest Design Review panel. My name is Julie Tanner. For those that don't know me, I'm a panel manager of Creating Excellence Design Southwest Review panel, but I also hold positions in Design Midlands, that covers the West and East Midlands, delivers design review. I'm a past chair of the Design Network, and I'm also a panel manager for Design West, which covers the West of England Combined Authority. So I'm very happy to have you all here today, and we're up to 100 delegates, which is fantastic. So moving swiftly on, I'm just going to make a very quick introduction using some slides, and I think shortly there, thank you. So we produced a comprehensive presentation. I think Richard and David, you can go off the screen now for a bit. It might make the screen a bit bigger for everybody to see the PowerPoint. We produced a full-length PowerPoint presentation on the National Design Guide as a member of the Design Network, and that's available, and we'll make sure that goes out to all delegates today. And that's an open source document for you to make use of in your own training events with officers, members, and within your own organisations. The National Design Guide, most of you will know, is a knitting together type document in some respects. It explains the design sections of the National Planning Policy Framework and Planning Policy Guidance, and its intention is to inform local design guidance and provides design guidance when local guidance is absent. So it's a really useful checklist. It provides common language, and it provides a structure for other documents within the same area of work. The 10 characteristics are also extremely useful, the 3 themes of character, climate and community balance all of those 10 characteristics, and all of them, of course, are relevant to planning and the delivery of better places and in placemaking. Design, as we know, is a process. It's sometimes can be mixed up and believed to be a purely subjective, and of course it can be subjective, but we believe that using prescribed approaches, then design can be an objective tool in the determination of development. And we go back to, survey analysis plan. All of us planners, that was the basis of our learning when we were students, and we still use today. And design has a key place as part of that process. Policy, Rich is going to talk about this in more detail, a Southwest case study in Taunton, but to ensure we achieve well-designed places, it's really important to consult with our communities and, deliver guidance and policy that will guide developments in the future. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but you will see the list of tools that you can use in the preparation of policy through local design guides, master plans, design codes, which of course are very topical at the minute, SPGs, etc. And process. This is something that I've made a career out of in terms of design review, but within local authorities and when submitting planning applications as a developer, obviously the design is a central part of how a development can be progressed through planning, through pre-app discussions at outline stages, parameter plans, how design is expressed in a design and access statement, the use of conditions to ensure that the scheme comes through the other end as you intended it to, and ensuring quality is not diminished between permission and completion. And yes, just quickly to mention the tools, the National Design Guide is very clear that the use of local design guides and codes are encouraged, that design review needs to be effective and independent and of its place, and the use of assessment frameworks such as Building for Life or Building for a Healthy Life, as it's now become, can all be really useful means of discussing design and placemaking with applicants and with your local authority. And obviously these can be a really good basis in which to communicate effectively with those that are engaged in the design process. So I'm going to finish now. I'm very conscious that I don't want to take up too much time, and I'm going to pass over to David from Create Streets, who'll give more of a national overview. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, and hello everyone. Slightly disconcerting because I can't actually see anyone on screen, but hopefully people are watching and interested and don't fall asleep. So I think I've got about 15 or so minutes, and I just want to, I guess, do a bit of a dive into some of the national context around planning, design codes, and where the sort of systems and reforms are going at the moment. Talk a little bit about Create Streets and some of the work we're doing. And I think for me, the crucial bit is about how we're going to bring communities into design and how we're going to actually start engaging genuinely and in an upfront way with communities rather than some of the consultation that we've seen and that we're trying to move away from the past sort of 30, 40 years. So Create Streets, we're a social enterprise and associated charity. We do research between the links for built environment, well-being, health, happiness, sustainability increasingly. And then we use this research with our work on urban design, where we're working with community groups, landowners, developers, local authorities, and whether it's in design of place or strategic advice or community engagement. So hopefully this is working for me. There we go. So what we do, so here's some of our research. Most of this I think is available online, looking at a variety of links between value and everything apart from location and house size. So views of water, views of greenery, proximity to greenery, density, facade quality, all these kind of things. Urban design. And then also trying to kind of bring together the right people to actually make this happen. So rather than, a lot of us and designers talking within a bubble, actually bringing, the right decision makers, key players, community groups into this. And we do this we run some series of webinars. When we could, we would run physical events, and there's some for our Creating Communities conference, which was physical 2 years ago, and this year was online, and brought people like the Secretary of State and Lord Glassman, notable architects. So Mikael Riches from Goldsmith Street came on to do a masterclass. Jeff Speck, for anyone who's familiar with urbanism in America, it's a fantastic urban designer, and he came and gave a masterclass. So please go onto our YouTube channel and give all of that a watch if you can. And then my favourite part as well, and I think the teams would agree, is the co-design with residents and neighbours. And this is a incredibly exciting project in Tower Hamlets with the St George and East community. Some of the work we try and do is looking to push back at some of the existing guidance. So what are the rules? Well, not necessarily rules, but what are the guidance and what are the documents which are out there which are stopping us from creating the places that people tend to love and people have expressed desire to live in? Whether that's highways, whether that's back-to-back, overlooking distances, secured by design. We're looking to try and reduce the impact of some of these and unintended consequences of some of these guidance. I think just before I start, I think we've got a poll question as well, just to check everyone is awake and looking. And I think it's going to pop up. Here we go. So this is the question I'm quite interested to ask. No idea what the answer might be, but I'd like to know, have you ever submitted an official comment to a local plan for your town or your neighbourhood? And you've got yes and no, and I can't vote apparently, so I think this is I don't know if this kind of stays up for a while or in the background, but please for my interest and knowledge, what I want to know is how how engaged people are and how people actually do get a chance to kind of feed into this. Okay, so we've got 41% yes. I'm going to make a note of that. Okay, we can come on to that later. Thank you very much. Okay, so building better and looking at some of the national context. So what came from the Building Better, Building Beautiful report, lots of those recommendations seems to be kind of feeding into some of the planning reforms. Some of the key challenges, the obvious one, need for new homes and new homes in the right places. One that I'm very passionate about, and the reason I got into urbanism, which is the need to be carbon neutral by 2050, and I put it earlier because I think that could change. The need to end the scandal of left behind places. We're with our associated charity, the Create Streets Foundation, are looking into how can we use interventions in some of the left behind places to improve the place quality, to help kind of engender a virtuous circle of improvement by whether they're multiple small changes rather than kind of throwing big infrastructure projects, which might not be as effective, and it'll be interesting to see what the Commission comes back with. But I think that's quite an exciting one to watch out for. And finally, the realisation, and hopefully we're all kind of coming along to this way of thinking now, which is we need to worry a lot more about mental health and well-being, and about how place can affect that. Here's a couple of bits of feedback from the Commission. One of the key themes was asking for more beauty. So we had 63% of people felt beauty should be an aim of planning and it should be important. And 87% felt that good design helped promote new developments. And that's That's definitely one of the things I've seen with a lot of our community projects, is actually when you involve the community at an early stage, genuinely, before you've got a plan in your back pocket, you can find that actually people ask for more homes. So some of the worries about NIMBYism are not necessarily well founded. It looked at beauty at 3 scales, so you can think of this as, you know, the beauty of the buildings, architecture, materials, complexity, space, the places which you then create, so almost your kind of intrinsic neighbourhood, you know, the streets, the squares, the local shop where you go to, you know, can you walk to the office, can you walk to feed your family, can you watch your children play from your window? But then also the really big strategic question, beautifully placed, and this for me is where sustainability sort of cuts right in as well. It's, you know, are we building in the right places? Are we thinking about transit-oriented development? Are we going to kind of engender, you know, more car dependency, or can we think differently about where we're going to build so that we don't negatively impact nature? We can create beautiful places. There's Goldsmith Street, council housing in Norwich. This is Savoy Circus from HJ, so these are all the new buildings. And we really need to think about how we use and how we think about space. So these two images are the same scale. You know, one is, you know, Siena, home to 30,000 people, temporary home for, you know, order of magnitude larger than that number of tourists for 1 or 2 weeks when we can actually get back and do that. Whereas on the right, an interchange at Houston, and we need to get away from thinking that we must have, you know, infrastructure like this to sustain other places. Actually, if we create places in the right place with the right levels of density and intensification, then we can create places on the left rather than what we've done for the past 60, 70 years post invention of the car. There's a lot of evidence on the association of street trees and more walking, fewer accidents, cleaner air, better residents' health, but also value. I know there's a lot of American studies where they've got between 3 to 15% value uplift. I was on a UK Green Building Council webinar yesterday looking at nature-based design and actually looking at, you know, incorporating sustainable drainage within trees. So not just a aesthetic feature, not just a feature which does improve your well-being, but also can contribute to the drainage of that area, meaning that you don't need to run, you know, incredibly expensive pipes under everywhere, and meaning that rather than, you know, creating huge concrete storage tanks to store all the water from this community, actually by creating a permeable place, you don't put that water into those tanks in the first place. And I think, you know, giving that really practical and links between the practical element of drainage, but also the value, really just makes the case for street trees almost undeniable and something that we need to really push forward in planting more. We're looking at our urban design, and we saw this image earlier, is actually the association between clear block patterns, so very clear backs, very clear fronts, which are associated with less crime, where you can protect essentially the access to the rear gardens, and a real sort of desire to think about space as a public and private and clearly public or clearly private category, rather than this sort of semi-public undefended space which doesn't really ever get owned by anyone or doesn't ever get used by anyone, and then creates, you know, can create very low density neighborhoods and, you know, a real waste of space. And we need to think, I think, much more carefully about how we use every, you know, square meter of space in our towns and cities, and ultimately in our country. Lots of our controlled studies show that we prefer places with some pattern, and there's a lot more of this on our website and our recent book of Streets and Squares. Evidence behind appreciation for colour, coherent complexity. So how do buildings look from 50 centimetres away versus sort of 50 yards away? You want a place which engages the eye with texture from afar, but also up close. So thinking about the materials that we're using. Some symmetry, people do tend to prefer this. That's why if you ever look at, if you ever walk past a watch shop, have a look at what time they've all set the watches to. and it'll be 10 to 2 to show the symmetry, and sort of people start to create faces as well, and there's lots of good research out there about the improvements in that, and some texture that invites you to walk as well. So this is creating facades and creating places. You know, we talk about many doors, narrow fronts, but places that you want to walk past. You're more likely to enjoy this walk and not notice the distance for this walk versus, you know, a long walk by a passive facade with no doors, nothing to look at. You know, that's, you know, potentially like a blank warehouse, that sort of style. And gentle density can deliver the number of homes required and maintain the connection to the street. And for me, this is one of the key things. You know, if London, you know, versus a Paris or a Barcelona is actually quite low density. If we do need to densify certain areas, we need to do it, you know, using terraces, using mid-rise, where we don't get the negative effects that you can see by some tall buildings, but also from very sparsely spaced out, detached and semi-detached properties. We've looked quite a lot at, and also the report looks a lot at how traffic stops friendships. This is a study in San Francisco, a Appleyard study, which looked at the number of friends that you have depending on the busyness of your street. And you can see that where there's light traffic street, far more people gather, far more people have friends across the street, not just on their side. This was updated in Bristol to make it more relevant. This is a 1980 study, I believe. So we can see the light traffic street, average of 6.1 acquaintances. In a medium, that goes down to 3.65 acquaintances. And in a heavy traffic, so we've got 20,000 vehicles a day, all the way down to 2.8 acquaintances, which I think is just an absolutely staggering study, and, you know, shows the need for us to start to humanise roads more. Rick, the actual idea and you know, talking about the current narrative around design codes, about how old regulating form is. I was having a little look in building regulations. We had them in ancient medieval England from 100 AD to 1580. Under Roman rule, they regulated how you lay the stones and the thickness of walls. There's evidence as well in Anglo-Saxon England that they were planning the rectilinear form of sites in towns such as Winchester as well. Okay, so what should be done? There's quite a lot going on in this slide, but essentially the key things are looking to change planning, looking at creating neighbourhoods, not just housing dormitories, regeneration, especially focusing on left behind places, bringing communities into this process far, far earlier. The management of places, how you actually, you know, what do you measure? Are we measuring happiness once we've built these places? Education as well for planners and for architects, stewardship to make sure that we incentivize people to take a holistic approach and actually, you know, be in it for the long term. And obviously the key one as well, nature, regreening our towns and cities for all the reasons that I've been through. With planning, we're looking to create this predictable level playing field, and from this point sort of 7 here, looking at national design code, I think is an important one to focus on. And what we're saying is, you know, local plans, design codes need to be shorter, so that not just planning professionals are looking at this, but everyone in the community has a chance to understand and feed into them, and also to be more visual. A picture will paint 1,000 words, and, you know, we always sort of say, don't trust the words, trust the pictures on these design codes. And the key for me is bringing this democracy into it. So how do we get wide public engagement? By moving potentially to using more digital tools to complement the physical workshops when we can get back to that, empowering the communities to then allow people to intensify the neighbourhoods with activity, life, and new homes. So here's our plea: co-design, not just consultation on, you know, option A, option B, but really design these places with the constraints laid out fairly and honestly, but with a, you know, genuine blank sheet of paper to allow the community to design places they would like to live in and to live around. We can use digital engagement tools. This is a sort of digital town hall style platform and software which is coming out. This is using digital mapping. This is a tool that we've created called Create Communities to, you know, open up comments to people who just, you know, couldn't afford to give up the time or didn't have the time to come along to those Wednesday and Monday 6 p.m. meetings. Looking at visual preference surveys, so asking people, you know, what style they do prefer, and really sort of getting the evidence behind that. On regeneration, I think the key one I'd like to pick out here is I guess the recycling of buildings, so point 5. So this theme is essentially around, and we're calling it deep green, is creating places which are going to last for hundreds of years, not places that, you know, we're throwing up, have a 30-year ROI and then, you know, we replace them. An amazing stat that I heard was, I think it was on Historic England, the embedded carbon of the Victorian terrace could drive a petrol car around the M25 300 times. So we need to really think about creating places that will last as a key anchor for our sustainability, not just the energy use of a place. You can see, I'm not sure how many of the telephone boxes on the right are going to be kept around for as long as the one on the left. You know, we need to create places that can adapt, that can become a shop, then a home, then an office, then a home, then a shop, and we'll stay there for hundreds of years. It's an example of a recycled building. I think I'm going to go through fairly quickly, judging by the time. That we need to enable, you know, create places, not just houses. So enable this gentle density, creating healthy streets for people, cleaning our urban air, and planting as many street trees as possible. I think that's my final slide. So, you know, if we can do all these things, start to think about regreening our towns and cities, taming the roads, intensifying where the communities are asking for it, so people can walk and cycle and get around without using the car, then we hopefully can create more places like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to pass over to Richard. Thanks, Richard.
Hi, thanks very much, and hello, everyone. We live in interesting times. For the design and planning agenda, we're urged to build better, build back better, build back greener, build back more beautifully, as David was saying. The RTPI launched a survey for planners on design capacity in local authorities, and I think that's extremely important, because it's how we achieve these things is going to be crucial. We've got the National Design Guide, which advocates local guidance, and that's essential to translate some of these large ideas to the here and the now. In the west of England, the combined authority is consulting on a placemaking charter, which I think has the advantage of promoting design at a high level. You saw in the previous presentation the idea of getting design further up the agenda, even to the extent of putting a minister for placemaking, which would be great. So what does all this mean on the ground? I'm going to take us through a design guide that I'm involved in at the moment in Somerset West and Taunton. It's a new authority. It's the merger of a couple of authorities. They've declared a climate emergency. Taunton is a designated garden town, which is exciting. And there's a commitment to design in commissioning a suite of design guides. So we're going to go through that. Hopefully, this will work. Had a bit of problem before. If it isn't going to work, I'm going to have to say next. So Charlotte, yes. So there we are. I think it's very important to nail our colours to the mast and try and say all the things that are on the agenda for design, much wider and much more comprehensive than perhaps has previously been the case. We need to make healthy places. We need to think about low or zero carbon. We need to think about places that connect and are resilient and adaptable and neighbourly, and bringing in questions of beauty, bringing those together in a quality place, having a sense of place. I think one of the measures of a good sense of place is if you say, I like it here. Next. So, as I say, we have a suite of design guides. On the left, the vision for Taunton as the garden town, a design charter and checklist for the town to see how we can operationalize those objectives, a public realm design guide, and then the district design guide. I'll talk about the first three very briefly and then go on to the design guide itself. The design guide is out, it's just finished its public consultation, and I'm working on revisions to that. So that's what the status is at the moment. So next one. So so there we are. It's important as a design guide to bring together all the national policy and guidance on the left. Things are changing so quickly. Now we've got Building for Healthy Life, and Manual for Streets is going to be revised as well. So that's a good feature. At the county level, we've had some very good conversations recently regarding, pardon me, regarding their revising their highway standards to take into account the approach of Manual for Streets, and we're working with them to create better streets. And then the design guide itself, and from that the guides relating to Taunton Garden Town. Next. So the vision for Taunton Garden Town, next, consists of thinking about, you can see a certain thought about growing here, growing our town greener, branching out to move in more clean ways, creating quality places to live, and really addressing what we're doing in the place, how we're doing it, and creating a better place for people. So those are some of the big highlight themes, and the next one is on the charter and checklist, which more or less is saying, how do we achieve these? Next. And we're doing that by setting broad themes, creating a checklist, and of course Building for Life is now going to be Building for a Healthy Life, looking at criteria to check against the general aims, including addressing the climate emergency criteria. And we hope to really endorse good schemes, because that's a good way to create exemplars, by having an award scheme. Next. So the public realm design does what it says on the tin. And next it says, for instance, we're talking about greening the spaces between buildings, the streetscape, as well as creating quality hard landscape. Next. So the design guide itself, as I say, this is a draft, and I'm, as we speak, virtually working on the amendments to that after public consultation, including a charrette that Julie was involved in, which involved lots of stakeholders within the area. So let's go to the next one. We feel it's important that that applicants really look at a number of stages in quite a logical sequence, and show this in design and access statements. Examining the project brief, what is it that's wanted? Are there options? How does it relate to existing policy? What is the quantum of development? Next, sorry, back. I meant to say stage 2, appraising the context of the site, the setting, how it's perceived from a distance, how you get there, how it relates to existing landscape and settlement patterns, understanding settlement patterns, the grain and the townscape that you're developing within. And then the third stage is appraising the site, the lie of the land, the boundaries, how we relate to those, what you can see out and in, how you approach it, where the connections are. And then developing, which is an extremely important stage, a design concept. Before getting into the detail of a design, show really the big idea. How do you relate to those 3 previous stages? How does appraisal impact on the nature of the design, the character of the design? And that's, if we want places to be locally distinctive, if we want places to be beautiful and mean something, then we feel that there needs to be a concept, a big idea about what the development is about and how it relates to those previous stages. Next. The next, thank you. So at a glance, on the left, you see the site, some sort of site in its context, in its landscape and its urban context, connectivity, where it's seen from, is there an edge that has to be addressed, etc. The middle one, showing the lie of the land, the contours, the levels of exposure, buildings that are important on the site or immediately around there, hedgerows, etc. And also the need for privacy, perhaps respected on that northern boundary. And then a concept plan here, before we get into, you know, thinking about housing types and specific dimensioning. Where are the frontages? Where are the backs? Where are the major streets? Where are the outlooks? Where are the public spaces and the play spaces? How do we get through the scheme? How do we enter the scheme? And is there a focus? Are there key building groups? Okay, next. And I think it's important when we're assessing design, and this is perhaps planners or anyone interrogating a design, to go from what I call the big to the small. Get some of the very big things right in the sequence of consideration, and the details will start to fall into place. If you take it the other way around, you get involved in detail without seeing the big picture. So I think this sequence is very important. You know, how does it respond to the context and the site and relevant policy? How is it structured? What are the building types and how they relate to the general concept? What are the materials and colors? And then about signs and fenestration and lighting. Next. So since the year dot as regards planning, it's been very keen to consider relating to the character of places. And we feel very much that it's almost a sort of motherhood and apple pie type of concept, but the question is how does one learn from locality? What does one pick out? And does it mean exactly copying what's there, or does it mean something else? So the guide spends some time on understanding locality. Next. Picking up cues about how buildings relate to each other and to the landscape. And this part of Somerset is nothing if it isn't to do with contours, and it's nothing if not to do with waterways running through settlements and groupings of buildings and how they relate to each other. Next. But taking the area as a whole, the lines on the map to say it's a local authority area are relatively recent and don't necessarily relate to the landscape character. So these are the broad character areas of the district, quite different in nature, from extremely low-lying to very elevated areas, to a coastline, to intimate landscapes, to the towns as well. So we have one AONB, one national park, two AONBs and a national park framing the area. Next. This is an area which is incredibly interesting geologically, because it's the kind of collision between the new rocks on the new geology on the eastern side and extremely old geology on the left side. And virtually everywhere you go into different character areas just based on materials, some of which, not many, are still available, or at least they should be recognized and saved, and they challenge us to think about the color and types of materials, new materials to put against them. Next. So the character is the areas are appraised under those headings. Next. Then we're into placemaking, and I think first of all it's a question of understanding what that is. It's the fusion of buildings themselves, the spaces between buildings and how they work, the street patterns, relationship to landscape, street furniture, etc. Next. So after discussion of these things, we're talking in the end about creating neighborhoods, not housing estates. Coherent neighborhoods with street patterns, with a high level of green space of different sorts, street trees, local allotments, swales and suds, rain gardens, community orchards, formal play areas, greens, etc. Even green walls and green roofs. And that next is imposed on, so next. The urban design structure of, at the top, the neighborhood center, where there are mixed uses, including primary school and a level of local facilities depending on the size of the neighborhood. You can see that there's connectivity with the center, and this is where you'd expect the bus stops and the bus routes, etc. The pink area is an example of an urban block. An urban block doesn't have to be absolutely regular and doesn't have to be absolutely of one type of building. It's to do with a clear distinction between fronts and backs. It's to do with creating the streets around, and the type of ways in which buildings address the streets. In the end, it's also about connectivity. Next. And these are some ideas about structuring of site. Even if we had a density, top left, of whatever it is, it doesn't have to be considered as uniform. It can be graded in a number of ways, either from a hard edge to a soft interior, or the other way around, or a high density core and a very low density periphery addressing countryside or whatever. So there's this idea of graded density, and that also pans out to graded housing provision and much more, hopefully, variety of housing provision. And then a street and place hierarchy down on the left-hand side. And this is where we've had some very fruitful discussions with the county highways, who are revising their standards to think about hierarchy of streets and places, not just streets, but places, streets not just as roads, but as linked connections between places where people are, where people move through active travel, such as foot and cycle, and where they park. Where are the fronts, where are the backs, and then bringing it all together in some kind of concept plan. Perhaps now we might break for the couple of questions that I have. I don't know whether we can do that, Charlotte.
Yes, I think it's a good idea, Richard, to break, because we've only got about 10 minutes left, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlotte's just bringing up a poll question, which you got 30 seconds to answer.
There you go. Very quickly. Are design guides helpful in raising design aspirations and outputs at the local level?
I think it's pretty conclusive so far. Let's see, 4% doubtful. Thank you.
Well, that's good, excellent. And the other question was, most local planning authorities have the capacity at all levels to promote and evaluate better design. Do you agree with that, or disagree, or whatever?
I think we know the answer.
That's a big indicator about how we can achieve this.
Shall we bring David back when this poll finishes, Richard, so we can have a conversation about a couple of these?
Well, I don't know whether we do that now, or shall I finish the presentation?
We need to do that rather quickly. We've only got 10 minutes, so yes.
Okay, very quickly then. If I can just take 2 or 3 minutes. So next, if we're to achieve good streets, we need to think more clearly about what housing typologies can be to address some of these making townscapes. So very quickly, 1, 2, and 3. So next, and next, and then next. Streets, parking, and placemaking. As I said, we're involving ourselves with the county to think about better design for home zones and integration of parking and place. Next. And there are a number of design topics which sadly I don't think I can go into, but you can see the sort of detailed design topics that the guide addresses. And of course, I think it's still on the Somerset West and Taunton website. I think I better leave it there, and thank you for taking part. Yeah, all those wonderful things. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. That's marvellous. And David, hi, thank you for yours as well. I think what's been great about the past hour is that we've explored the aspirational aspects of beauty and how we want to encourage beauty and beautiful places and beautiful streets and whatever. And Richard, you very eloquently taken us through the process, I think, of how that can be achieved within the context of the planning system. So thank you very much indeed for both those presentations. They've been really, really thoughtful, and I could listen to you all day, of course, but we don't have all day. So I've got a couple of questions, and I suppose I think the one question I had in mind was how to define beauty, but I think, Richard, you've answered that to an extent. But I think a lot of people are concerned about the capacity to actually deliver these local design guides, and you know, how achievable is that within the sort of current, you know, capacity that local authorities have and the demands on local authorities to deliver what they need to deliver?
Yeah. I think a design guide nails the colours to the mast. It's saying what the aspirations are for a local authority. It's giving some sense, it's giving some direction about what we kind of expect. And I think it's important to set out the sort of criteria. But in the end, a design guide has to be negotiated between planners and developers. And this is the whole question of capacity. And I'm going to say this, and I would say it, but planning education needs far more time devoted to design. It's always there in planning education, and that's great. But I think that quite often planners, when they emerge from a planning course, find themselves ill-equipped to really undertake design negotiation. Now, there are hopefully in most authorities some design specialists, but they're quite often relatively thin on the ground and under huge pressure. So we must increase the capacity for planners.
I think.
You beg your pardon. David, have you any perspectives you wish to share?
Yeah, I mean, not sort of having worked within a local authority, I can't necessarily answer everything on that. But in terms of the capacity, I think using, started to use an increasing number of digital tools can definitely help. I think going a bit further, so looking at design guides, yes, but also moving on to design codes and about where you can use design codes to set in place rules at a strategic level at an earlier stage that then actually reduces some of the burden on planning authorities to go down into sort of every single small extension and planning application, but actually it helps them to focus on some of the big strategic questions or some of the big strategic developments, so that we can put more time onto that. I totally agree with Richard in terms of education and bringing design. I'm always amazed, I've got a weird background, as you alluded to, Julie. I'm always amazed by how siloed the industries of highways, planning, design are, and I really want to kind of bring those in so that everyone is speaking the same language essentially. But also and sort of on how you define beauty or quality of place. Let's ask people, let's ask the local communities, let's ask residents, let's find out what people say, but also what people do. Let's use polling, let's use engagement at a co-design rather than just a consultation level.
I think that's very interesting, and Carl Ranscombe has raised that very point about how you embed co-design and placemaking. You seem to have some experience, well, you both have experience of that. Do you see that being effectively embedded into mainstream planning as a process? I
mean, if I jump in, yeah. So the questions, do I think it will be, or do I hope it will be, embedded as a principle? So co-design embedded as a principle into planning. I mean, for myself and Creative Streets, absolutely. That's what we're sort of, really fighting for and pushing for, to get more people. I mean, it was quite the poll I ran, which was 41% of people on the call have left a comment. I imagine there's probably quite a strong expertise of people watching this, or people who are very interested in to be giving up their lunchtime to talk about planning. That's still under half of people who've actually left an official comment, which we need to kind of up that, and I believe but also if you extrapolate that across the just people going about their day who don't have an interest in planning but do have an interest in the look or feel of their street, or how their local park, we need to bring those people in.
And I think, just turning to Richard, I have been so impressed with the beauty of the Somerset West and Taunton documents. How have the community responded to that? Do they benefit from the illustrations in those documents in terms of how they can respond, do you think?
Well, I like to think so. I think that people do engage with hand drawing. I think that especially sort of annotated diagrams are helpful. I think a guide without showing some sort of illustration about what we mean can be very difficult to ensure that we're all thinking about the same thing. And I think actually the diagrams actually show that what we're asking for is buildable. It's not, we're not saying anything that can't be done and can't be done well. So I hope that the sort of drawing that I do engages people rather than having very icily perfect, very technical looking drawings.
I must say I do agree, and I always find it lovely to look at your drawings. One question we've had two questions on the historical sort of basis of design. But is following historical design too prescriptive, and could it act as a limit to creativity and innovation? And how do you prevent that happening? Yeah. Richard, do you want to
obviously, we could have a day on this at least, yeah. But very, very briefly, history should be there to be respected, should be responded to, but it doesn't require you to copy it. So the scale is important, the grain of built form is important, the layout's important, to respond respectively to it. There are some very good architects that know exactly what I mean about that. Yeah. So the worst thing you can do to history is to have very diluted, weak-kneed pastiche of it. Either do it extremely well and intelligently and with knowledge, or leave it alone and respect the scale and the colors, the textures, the way it sits on the ground. Go with the spirit of the place.
Yeah. David, anything to add on that in terms of kind of restricting innovation and creativity? I mean, is the role of an architect crucial in placemaking?
That's a big question. Traditionally, a lot of places, didn't have a role of an architect, and a lot of the most popular places we do visit haven't always had an architect's touch on them. So I think that doesn't necessarily have to be there. In terms of how we use history and how we use codes and whether they're restrictive or not, I think we need to think of it more as a cookbook of, a recipe book for different ways to create places. So, you can sort of pick up the different ingredients which are based there from, from a code or from a pattern book to then create places which are popular, but still allow, people to put their, individual touch on it. However, we do need to try and create places that people want to live in, not places that architects want to design. So that's, that's something we're quite passionate about, and we do need to ask people what their preferences are. But in terms of you don't necessarily have to just copy what's been done in history, but let's look at the proportions, the complexity, things to do with symmetry, some of these rules that do create, as backed by evidence, places that people are by and large like more and prefer to live in.
Yes, Richard, and just very quickly, we are starting to lose people slightly because we're going over the time, but I'm happy just to go on for another couple of minutes so Richard can answer that question, please. Yeah.
I'm sure most planners will know that the number of applications submitted by architects compared with their whole load is very small, and especially in the more rural areas. So it's not a question of architects versus anyone else. There's lots and lots of built environments that never see the hand of an architect. So it's to do with good or bad. It's to do with the skill of the design, and that is relating to place. Very few people are designing monuments themselves. That's really not the reality of the situation. So I think we got to spread the good design agenda much more widely, because most applicants are not necessarily designers.
No, absolutely. Unfortunately, I think we could carry on talking, and it's been absolutely wonderful to have you in conversation today, but we have gone over our time and we are starting to lose attendees, unfortunately. For those that are still here, we will answer these questions. We'll ask the panelists to reflect on them and provide something back to everybody, and Charlotte will make sure that the handouts, the presentation itself, I mean, Richard effectively produced a masterclass in urban design for us today, so you will all benefit from those slides, and I'm very grateful for both David and Richard and their contributions and the time taken today. Now, Charlotte just wanted me to remind you that there will be a feedback survey. But also we have other RTPI events coming up, and one that I've personally been involved in is in December. I'll just click that open just to remind you of the date. This is from the National RTPI Urban Design Network on the 7th of December, and this is a half-day event this time when Joanna Averley, the new Chief Planning Officer for England, will be involved, Professor Matthew Carmona, Dr. Victoria Thompson from Historic England, Mike Leonard from the Building Alliance, and Vicky Payne from Urbed. So we have a really amazing range of speakers, and also perspectives from Scotland and Northern Ireland as well in that webinar. So I hope for those that are interested, please do come along. You'd be very welcome. And thank you very much.
Thank you.